Well, space agencies from several countries are racing to reach the south pole of the moon. It's thought valuable resources like frozen water are present there, but it remains unexplored. A Russian spacecraft had been on track to get there first after launching 2 weeks ago, but it crashed into the moon at the weekend. Russia's space agency blamed it on the country's decades-long pause in lunar exploration. Moscow hasn't said how much it spent on the mission. Meanwhile, NASA's Artemis mission to take astronauts to the moon is set to resume by 2025. It's estimated the program will cost around $93 billion. Now, an Indian spacecraft has landed there after a failed attempt 4 years ago. The mission is costing India's space agency a relatively modest $74 million. Well, Dhara Patel is a space expert at the UK's National Space Centre.
Now that we're in the 21st century, what we're seeing is this kind of new space race where lots of different companies, lots of different organizations and nations are vying to get back to the moon. But unlike the Apollo era, where it was trying to get the first people to the moon and proving it was possible, the idea now is that we're trying to build this long-term kind of sustainable presence for humans on the moon. And I guess this time round, we've got other nations and other companies that are or have the technology that allow them to compete in this space race.
So what are they hoping to find there? Is there anything in particular that they want to discover?
Lots of the organizations that we've been hearing about in the news recently, so the Indians and the Russians, they're targeting the south pole of the moon. And what we know from previous missions is that there is likely to be frozen water in the form of ice in the permanently shadowed regions of these craters at the south pole. And if we can, set up habitation at the South Pole where we already have resources like water there, then it means that we don't have to take those certain resources from the Earth to the moon when we're doing our future space exploration. So there's a particular, importance or a kind of look at the South Pole just because we think this is a place where we might find water.
And why has the South Pole up till now not been explored?
So previously, lots of the missions that landed on the moon have landed on what we call the near side of the moon. There has been a Chinese mission that has landed on the far side, but all of these missions have landed in the equatorial regions. When we send a spacecraft from the Earth to the moon, they sort of fly or travel in that kind of trajectory, and they're already traveling, making it easy for them to land in that equatorial plane. What a spacecraft has to do in order to land at a pole is change from being in an equatorial orbit into a polar orbit, essentially changing its orbit by about 90 degrees. And so that hasn't necessarily been done before.
But it's not just about the science, is it? It's also about the economic benefits. What might those be of exploring the South Pole?
Yeah, so it's not just the water that we're looking for, but it might be that the moon holds other precious or kind of important elements and minerals there that we can also use as resources, not just on the moon, but potentially resources for back on use here on Earth. I think what we've got to be careful of is that, space and the sort of laws and regulations haven't necessarily kept up with the pace of space exploration. And it means that we don't necessarily have laws and regulations in place to keep companies and organizations within the boundaries of what we think fair use of space should be. I think as we go into the future, we need to be very careful of kind of this political difference between countries or looking at the economic advantage that some countries get over others because they haven't been able to travel to the moon. So, yes, there can be advantages, but I think we've got to make sure that they're for the benefit of all humankind.
We've seen the United States, for one, announcing a plan to develop a lunar economy. How valuable is the lunar economy?
I think there's definitely advantages to the feats of space exploration. With the Apollo era, going back to that, and lots of countless space exploration programs since, we have seen advances in technology which have then provided use and benefit here on Earth. Research that's being done on the International Space Station right now, a laboratory orbiting 400 kilometers above our heads, that research is actually making its way back down to the Earth and helping with not just things in science in terms of space, but in terms of medicine and practice in those senses. So there's definitely benefit in terms of, reaching out and having a lunar economy. But I think for the longer term ambitions of humans in wanting to get to Mars, having a setup and a lunar base will provide a really helpful and strong stepping stone in order to achieve those future kind of plans.